o'clock this morning when I was picking up donuts if I would be eating 3 dozen all by myself. Not that I wouldn't have minded, but so thanks for coming. We may have some other people wander in, but there are plenty of coffee and donuts over there. We're fortunate today to have John Kahler, who is going to tell us about Rochester's early Wright brother. John was showing me some pictures that he may show you of what he called his cruise ship to Korea. And I'm not sure if people that spent time in Korea thought of it going over as a cruise or not, but maybe it was different if you were a flyboy and could get off the ship and then land back down again. I give you John, and he will entertain you today. So thank you, John.
Well, as all of you already know, I'm John Kahler. I've lived around the Rochester area most of my life, and in Minnesota all my life. I spent all my working lifetime either dodging work and going out flying airplanes or trying to run a hotel or 2 or 3 or 4. And I retired in 1980, and since then I've been able to do all kinds of grand and glorious things, not the least of which is to go around the country visiting aviation museums, which really are, I guess, maybe my first love. This last fall, my wife and I had to go to Dayton, Ohio to a meeting, and I had the good fortune of going to the Air Force Museum, of course. And then we decided, since in Dayton, Ohio, you've got the Air Force Museum, which if you want to put your mind to it, you can spend 3 or 4 days going through it and never see it all. You got to go back again. But they also have the Hartslow propeller factory, and that is a real experience. I had no idea how they make propellers, but I know now. And they make metal ones, and they make wooden ones, and so forth. And they also have the Waco Museum, and I think most of you will remember that name from early aviation days. Before 1929, they built more Waco airplanes than any other airplane in the United States. So it does have an interesting background. And then there was something in Dayton that I'd never heard of before called the Carillion Museum and Park. And if you ever go to Dayton, Ohio, and you like aviation and you like history, go to that park. It's partially sponsored by National Cash Register, NCR. It's not too far from downtown Dayton. And at that park, they have not a replica, not a rebuild, they have the original 1905 Wright Flyer in living color. And it just, I don't know why airplanes don't usually take my breath away, but when I walked in there, the setting they have it in and the shape that it's in, it just took my breath away. Well, anyway, so we puddled around the Dayton area, and we decided as long as we've gone this far, let's really do it up brown. So we went to Elmira, New York. A few years ago, I couldn't pass my flight physical, so I took up soaring, because they don't have to have a flight physical. And I've been soaring ever since. Most of it in bars or someplace like that, but soaring ever since. Then we went to the National Warplane Museum, which is also in Elmira, and the Schweitzer glider factory, and I was kind of dumbfounded. Schweitzer doesn't make gliders anymore. All they produce in their factory is helicopters, which was, to me, very interesting since I was one of the early Navy helicopter pilots back in the Korean War. From there, we went to Old Rhinebeck, New York. For those of you who are familiar with that museum, they have World War I airplanes and replicas of just about anything you can imagine, but the most important part of it is they fly foolish things.
Cole Palin still alive?
No, I think he's passed on, but the museum is there. It could use some attention, but we really enjoyed it. And our next stop was, what the heck was the name of that town? Hammondsport, New York. And we went to the Glenn Curtiss Museum. So I got to see the Wright brothers end of it and the Curtiss end of it, and they don't match. We had a terrible fight during the flight. And it's interesting that the Curtiss and Wrights were the Wright brothers and Glenn Curtiss, and their 2 companies merged to become Curtiss-Wright. But prior to that, they didn't even speak if they could avoid it. How's the biggest turkey of them all?
Since you weren't done.
How'd you ever make it through Thanksgiving?
I couldn't get my car doors open.
Why didn't you call me? I just live up the street. Anyway, we went, Glenn Curtis Museum, and you know, nothing in this life comes free, and you ladies have got a way of doing things. In order to get my wife to agree to go to all these museums, I had to do something for her, so I took her up to Freeport, New York, to the mother house of L.L. Bean. And she could shop her living eyes out. I didn't give her any money, but she did go shopping. I put all this in as kind of a prelude because I wanted you to understand that I'm dead serious about this aviation business, and I have really enjoyed it. What are you two doing? Yeah, no, I don't want that. Now, this is me a few years ago when I got out of the Navy and I was looking for work. And I would like to be sure that everybody realizes that we always need a handout or something. Why don't you it's much easier.
What?
You did. Okay. Fine. Now, another of the things that I find interesting is I'm not sure. The biggest problem we have with aviation is nobody wants to take responsibility for anything. If it costs money, it's somebody else's fault. If something breaks, it's somebody else's fault. And one day somebody sent me this, and I had to agree. It's kind of like going to coffee with a couple of friends over at Barlow's in the morning. Nothing is organized. And that's that. Now, before I get into the Minneapolis airport and the Rochester airport, let's see if I can get this right. So, boy, there we are. A few years ago, the state legislature decided that they wanted to study the possibility of closing the Minneapolis airport and building a new one down by Hastings. And I got deeply interested in it because of a fellow named Jerry Gratis, who didn't have to convince me, but he and I did a lot of talking and work together. And I was convinced that Rochester Airport would just fold up and go away if they built the new airport that close, because nobody would be, no airline was going to fly 25 miles. And so I got on what they termed the dual track task force. It was a little offshoot of the Metropolitan Airport Commission in Minneapolis, and we spent a whole year evaluating the possibilities and concluded that it wasn't a very good idea. And I think we can thank our lucky stars that it came out that way, because the Rochester Airport has grown since that time, and the Minneapolis Airport is still up and running. It's just too bad that they didn't use the zoning and planning a little more carefully in the Twin Cities, because they let people build right up to the fence line. But that's history, and none of us could do anything about it. While I'm on the Minneapolis Airport, I thought you might have some interest in some of the projects as we... Oh, does anybody have any questions about this slide? It just shows you where the airport would be in relation. Highway 52 is up here on the left at the bottom. You can see Hampton there. So that gives you a general location of the airport. Very flat land there. Very, very expensive farmland. Very mad people when they heard they were going to use it. This is one of the slides of the new part of the airport up in Minneapolis. For those of you who have gone through there, you've probably gone right through this area. It's where they put what they call the green gold connector. That's so you can get from one side of the airport together without walking 17 country miles. It would still seem like it's 17 country miles. And this is right at that intersection. And after 9/11, a lot of those shops and stores were in kind of rocky position, but I've been told that everything is coming back now. Well, we have people in Rochester who realize something's gonna happen, but they don't know exactly what it is. And I keep getting questions about this people mover that's being mounted on the outside of what they call terminals A, B, and C in Minneapolis. And it should have been up and running by now, but due to a couple of accidents, it's not in service yet. It should start sometime in the spring. So if you come in from Minneapolis and you have to go out from some gate on the other side of the airport, this will whisk you up to the terminal part of the airport in about less than 2 minutes. And you can't walk it in 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It's really going to be an enhancement for you. We'll have this well organized. I thought I'll just pass these around, and that's the Admiral I was Admiral Phelps' helicopter pilot. That's the Admiral inspecting this, and it's me on the engine. This is the aircraft carrier that was there. That we were on. And this is the out in San Diego, California, and those bees are really helicopters. I think they're 16. And our commanding officer decided he'd like to have us in a big, long line. I happened to be flying the last airplane at the end of the line, and the CO decided that he was going to go out to sea and turn around and come back. Well, by the time he made his tour, I must have been 20 miles behind the rest of it, which was like crack the whip. It was really, it was one of those days when I wasn't very proud of what I did in aviation. Now, we'll get to why we're really here, and that is to talk somewhat about our years. The two airports. I'm going to talk about the Minneapolis airport first because that's the way I got it in my book, but it doesn't mean that it's any more important than the Rochester airport. The Minneapolis airport is part of a 7-airport group. It's the Twin City International plus 6 reliever airports. And the relievers are strategically located around the Twin Cities. Does anybody know what a reliever airport really is? Does anybody want to know what a reliever airport
Yeah, you
really
can't
is?
land at the main one, so you have a place to go to.
Yeah, well, that's about right. The reason they bought the reliever airports was so that they could provide facilities for small airplanes to stay away from the major airport where you had all the big airplanes. And it's worked out beautifully for the system like that. There are, well, as we go through this, you get the idea. MAC was formed by the state legislature 60 years ago, and it is the governing body for the Metropolitan Airport system. It's a public corporation, and it was funded and founded by the state legislature in 1943. That's 7 years ago. My addition is in there. And it was to provide safe, efficient, economical, and environmentally sound aviation. Responsible for developing and operating regional air transportation systems. One of the things that some people fail to realize is that the Minneapolis airport isn't just there to serve the 7-county area or the Twin Cities. It is really a regional transportation hub. And we have to keep remembering that when we're marketing it, South Dakota, North Dakota, nearby Wisconsin and Iowa are all part of it. There's an organization called the Airport Council International, and they do a lot of statistical work, and they concluded as recently as last year that the MSP, which is Minneapolis Airport, is seventh largest airport in the world from the point of operation, and it's 16th largest in the world as far as passenger traffic is concerned. So it's really a big, big operation. MAC and the reliever airports generate 800,000 operations a year.
What's an operation?
Airplane taking off.
Thank you.
In 2002, there were 32,629,000 passengers that went through the Minneapolis airport. And that gave them a total of 507,669 operations. So it's a busy, busy place. And that's why the walk seems so damn far sometimes. You gotta have a lot of space to keep that activity going. In the 1920s and 30s, Minneapolis and St. Paul operated separate competing airports. Each city issued bonds for airport land and maintenance and levied property taxes for airport operations. In 1920, a private aero club established at Low Chamberlain Field on the site of an unsuccessful racetrack. I don't know how many people realize that MSP was actually a racetrack back in the early days, but it was. And they operated out of the infield at that racetrack. Northwest Airlines, and it was called Airways at that time, won the U.S. mail contract and acquired the only hangar on the airport in 1926. That's even before I was born. 2 years later, Minneapolis Park Board began operating the airport, and they renamed it the Minneapolis Municipal Airport. Northwest began passenger service in 1929. And I believe that I've got some information up on the mantle in our house of that was given to my great uncle when they started air service here, and that was in 1929 also, at Log Field. By 1938, the airport boasted 3,000-foot paved runways. There were 3 of them, and a U.S. Weather Bureau station and a control tower. St. Paul had developed an airport downtown, and it was striving to make that facility the premium airport in the metropolitan area. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of competition and everybody was getting taxed for it. Finally, the legislature stepped in and they created one airport and they designated the Minneapolis airport as the primary airport for the area. And they authorized it in 1943. The Minneapolis Municipal Airport became the primary facility and known since 1948 as the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, World Chamberlain Field. MAC, that's the governing body, can own and operate airports within 35 miles of the city halls of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And that's why it's referred to as Twin City all the time. Today they operate one of the nation's largest airport systems, and I've already explained where some of that information comes from. In 2002, if you take the 7 air, can you hear me?
A little louder, please.
It's too bad the old fellows have trouble. I had coffee with Bob Springer almost every morning. He can't hear anything there either.
You wait.
I do wait. In 2002, the 7 airports had 1.3 million takeoffs and landings, and these were the airports that are owned by the MAC, or the Metropolitan Airport Commission. MAC is made up of 15 commissioners. One is the chairman, and then there are 14 commissioners. I was a commissioner for 6 years and enjoyed it very much. But of the 16 commissioners, 12 of them are appointed by the governor, and just a minute, I said that wrong. 14 of them are appointed by the governor, and 1 each are appointed by the mayor of Minneapolis and the mayor of St. Paul. The mayors may take the position themselves, but I don't know of any time when they've done that. They've usually designated somebody. And then the 15th person, of course, is the chairman. The chairman of the commission can come from any part of the state, but each one of the commissioners comes from a designated area. In the early days of the commission, all of the commissioners came from the Metropolitan area, and they just, like legislative districts, divided the Metropolitan area up and then had a commissioner drawn from that area. It became apparent that they weren't serving the region as they were supposed to be, so they took 4 positions out of that, and they had 2 positions that were called minor airports and 2 positions that were called key airports. The key airport designation went to Rochester and to Duluth, and the minor went to Moorhead and to Marshall, Minnesota. When Jesse Ventura became governor, everything went out the window, and he ended up selecting people from the northeastern part of the state, so there were 3 outstate representatives from the northeast, nobody from the southeast, nobody from the northwest. And now I've been told that Governor Palani is trying to get this leveled off, and there will probably be a position open for somebody from Rochester December 31st of this year. I say probably because I've been told that the gentleman from Hibbing is not going to reapply, and that will be the opening. And that's a key opening. Don't ask me how, when it's supposed to be Duluth, it got to Hibbing, but that's what's happening. When it comes to decision-making at the Minneapolis airport, almost all decisions are made by the commission. We do, as a commission, they do report to the state legislature, but that's very seldom are we called on to make an official report to them. They go over our books, and they see to it that we're operating as efficiently as we can, and from that point on, unless there's something specific, we seldom hear from anybody over at the legislature. Day-to-day operations are handled by the airport staff, and I'm happy to say that I was proud to work with those people. It's one of the leaner airport operating staffs of any airport in the United States, in the world for that matter, and it operates very efficiently. When 9/11 came along, everybody had to cut back, of course, and it was very difficult for the airport commission to take anybody out of their staff because they were operating that lean. And I think that they've proven, even to Northwest Airlines, that if you operate efficiently, you can weather some of these storms. Now, MAC has the power. Some of the powers of the commission: it may acquire, establish, develop, extend, and operate airports, but not construct a major new airport without approval of the legislature. So they can do almost anything they have to do in order to make an airport more usable, but they can't up and start a major new airport without prior approval. They can level property taxes to pay debt on general obligations. They may levy a limited property tax, minor percent, but property tax for operations and maintenance. The Airport Commission has never levied a tax. The last last time they levied a tax was in 1980. And that was to help us get into the expansion of the present airport in Minneapolis. That was before my time. Prior to that, the only time they levied a tax was back in 1961. Yes?
Can they acquire land outside the airport?
No,
They cannot.
they cannot. They,
There's a map which shows the airport, and outside of that, they can't acquire land. I was thinking about noise abatement. Might be cheaper to buy some of these houses than,
well, they've been doing that.
So
They paid for insulation. Something like $238 million has been invested in insulating homes. The big problem when you start dealing with that, it sounds like it's kind of simple. Why not just buy it and clear the land and make a golf course? But the cities really get all puckered up because they're going to lose tax revenue. So they don't want any of those houses to disappear. So you've got a two-headed monster working. Anybody else got any questions about that noise abatement? We may be faced with that someday here in Rochester, but from what I'm seeing, the people that handle the, what am I trying to say? The zoning and so forth, have done a good job of protecting the airport and also protecting future homeowners. Because somebody will build a house next to an airport, and then they're going to be mad because it's noisy. And nobody seems to remember that airplanes aren't butterflies. They're noisy little rascals. Let's see. Roughly 40% of all revenues from the Minneapolis airport are generated by rates and fees to the airline. And then 20% of the operating income comes from concessions like parking and the rentals of the stores that I showed you a picture of there. The balance of it, we have to make up by ingenious plotting. Going to skip a little bit of this. This is something I've never quite understood. MAC has very significant autonomy. However, once in a while, partisan politics rears its ugly head, and then we have big problems. And I'm talking from the commission's point of view. It's important that people who understand and constantly work with airports run the airports. It's not a business like most businesses are. It's not a business where you can come in, stir up the pot, and then walk away and expect it to continue successfully. It just won't function that way. Fortunately, MAC has got less bureaucracy and regulation than many of the municipal and state organizations. One of the things of which the Metropolitan Airports Commission is most proud is that they have been able to provide a very, very high level of service to the region that they function in, and do it at a cost that is less than at most airports around the country. And the way they measure that is cost per enplanement. In other words, how much does it cost the airline in fees to board on an airplane? Now, in San Francisco, the cost to the airline is $19.46 a passenger. Denver, $16.30. O'Hare, $9.38. MSP, $4.93. There are some airports that are less expensive than Minneapolis. Las Vegas at $4.90, but they don't have to have the snow removal equipment. And they don't have to have a couple other things that warm weather gives them an advantage. In Phoenix, Los
Excuse
Angeles,
me, John, could you comment on why the Minneapolis airport is so much lower Do they not have unionized employees, or
They
do
do
they
have-
pay lower wages, or what is the reason it's so much lower?
Well, part of it is that they run with such a lean staff.
Yeah,
The rest of it is that we haven't had a tremendous, by comparison, a tremendous amount of new construction. So the depreciation isn't going on the books,
Okay.
and it doesn't have to be
Well, that makes a lot of
recaptured. As far as wages are concerned, MAC is like any other governmental type body, and either you are on par with other organizations or you don't have any employees. It's just plain and simple. And MAC has been very, very efficient in their hiring practices, and they've been super good in training. And I think that's why the system is able to run.
well, I would think it would be a desirable place to work for those that wanted to do the kind of work they have, because you can't send it offshore to China or somewhere, and you have to be there.
Well, there's a lot to that. However, you've got to make the environment right for the people too. And it's a two-way street. They really do a good job.
Are they unionized?
Yes, many of them are.
Many of them.
Some of them are.
I would think Northwest's base out there would be a tremendous source of revenue.
Well, they have 80% of the operations that go on at the airport, so through their system, 80% of the money that comes to the airport comes from that one airline.
But they have a huge base there for the maintenance and the repair of the aircraft. right?
Sure.
Yeah. Those big hangars where it's actually a business. The point is that Minneapolis Airport's got a source of revenue that a lot of the other airports don't have in terms of building the airplanes and refurbishing airplanes.
Well, I wouldn't want to play that down. There's something to that, but please remember that there are many airports around the United States, but Detroit is a good example, that are hubs for major airlines, and they've got the same facilities. And so Northwest Airlines, if my figures are correct, employs about 200,000 people.
200,000?
Yeah, all over in their system. And about 20,000 of those are in the Twin Cities. I hope I'm not stretching that, Art, but they've got people all over the world, so gotta keep that in mind. Okay? Well, so much for the,
No, that's not good.
yeah, in 2002, now here is part of the answer to your question. MSP boarded 34 million passengers in round figures. They have 540 employees on the staff at MAC. That means that we had 63,519 passengers per employee. At Phoenix, they boarded 34,300,000. They have 671 employees. And so their boarded passengers amounted to 51,000 per employee. You get down to San Francisco, they've got 1,458 employees, and the numbers of passengers per employee are 24,211, or less than, much less than half of the Twin Cities. Los Angeles has got 2,500 employees, but they boarded 61 million passengers out there. That's a lot of people.
That includes transit passengers that land from Hawaii and go on to
Yes.
Boston.
Well, just like Minneapolis,
Yeah.
it's got all the connecting passengers from the hub.
So the
office.
passenger counts twice.
Uh,
Once when he gets off an airplane, once when he gets on.
oh yeah,
Okay.
certainly. In the last few years, MAC has implemented a $3.1 billion expansion program, and that includes a new north-south runway and a new Humphrey terminal, which there's some question about whether we were wise when we authorized that, but before 9/11, it looked pretty good. And I think it'll snap back, starting to grow again. And they put 42 new gates on the Lindbergh terminal. They built 11,000 parking stalls. And they've got underground and elevated people movers. And next year, we will have the light rail serving the airport from Minneapolis. And that's going to be something to behold when they get that up and running, because nobody's ever done it the way we're doing it. They're going to, people in the Humphrey terminal supposedly get a free ride over to the Lindbergh terminal, so we can take all those buses off the road and things like that. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the Minneapolis airport that they would like to address?
I have two.
Go.
They're sort of like, what are pet peeves? And maybe you can shed some light on it. One is, in this weather, you have to de-ice airplanes.
Yep.
And you've been, and I've been in a situation where it was de-ice, and you go out, and it took too long, you come back and get de-ice the second time. Why doesn't the airport provide the de-icing? Why does every airline do it itself? Why don't you have one de-icing station at the end of the runway and where you turn, say, and de-ice right there and take off? Whether it's a United airplane or a Northwest airplane, shouldn't make any difference. And charge for the service.
Okay. That's exactly what's happening at Minneapolis right now.
It is?
Part of this $3.1 billion expansion thing called for 4 de-icing stations,
Fantastic.
2 on
Thank
each
you.
end of the field.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Now, part of the reason that it was impossible to do that was because they had no way to capture the de-icing materials that went onto the ground. They had to build great big
Oh, yeah.
de-icing holding ponds to collect all of that stuff and then get it trucked out of there. And they had to do a lot of construction to do it. There was no place to construct something like that till we bought up some buildings and so forth. The most latest acquisition was the old Navy hangar that sat on the field. Next time you go there, you'll note that's gone. And
Is that right?
that is the last of the de-icing pads that's being built.
Second pet peeve, who or what is keeping Southwest Airlines out of the Twin Cities?
Herb Kahler. His answer when we went to see him was, not no, hell no. Why doesn't he want to come to Minneapolis? His logical explanation made good sense to me.
Where was it?
Well, first of all, there are areas of the United States that he can go into and not have to fight a battle with Northwest Airlines. Northwest is a very, very strong competitor. Southwest Airlines is not an international carrier. They don't fly to Canada or Mexico.
Yeah.
So Minneapolis would be the end of the line. There's no place for them to draw business.
Like San Diego.
Yeah, there's no place for them to draw additional business from. And I just told you how many people go through the airport, but most of that's controlled by Northwest Airlines. And they're not going to make it easy for anybody coming in to pick up some of that business. So it would be head-to-head competition with Northwest. Now, when you take into consideration that when they went up to the Boston area, and I don't know that real estate well enough to know what where the airport is that they fly into, but it's not the big Boston airport.
Not Logan.
Huh?
Not
No,
Logan.
not Logan. And I can't, I probably shouldn't have gotten in this conversation. 'cause I
Flying
don't
with
know.
Providence.
Okay. They fly into there, and the reason they do it is because they can operate less expensive. Also, the reason they would rather go there than to come to the Twin Cities, we've got about 4.5 million people in our operating area. They've got 16 million in their operating area. So there are more passengers to draw from. But Mr. Kahler made it very clear, maybe sometime down the way, they'll look at it. But there are other cities that have got priorities in
So
this.
you've actually tried to get him rather
Oh,
than stiff on him.
Steve Leckway from Rochester Airport has talked to them. Our people in Minneapolis have talked to them on a continuing basis.
Okay. One last question this time. Is the airport called Lindbergh or Wold Chamberlain, and who were Wold and Chamberlain?
Well, they were both military pilots that got killed. And so it's kind of like O'Hare Field. Butch O'Hare was a very prominent Navy pilot and got killed. The name of the field now is Twin City International Airport.
Neither Lindbergh nor,
Well, it's Lindbergh Field. That's the name of the field.
okay,
And it's the Hubert Humphrey Terminal.
okay.
Okay?
But that's just one of the terminals.
That's, well, excuse me, it's Lindbergh Terminal, Hubert Humphrey Terminal, Woe Chamberlain Field. So they're all names and none of them have disappeared, they're there.
Yeah.
But to avoid confusion,
Okay,
you know, order by number, red, 1, 2, white. Okay?
Humphrey Pink.
Oh, an interesting aside, a few years ago, they decided, you know, we had the red and the green and the gold and the blue concourses. And we were gonna add 2 more concourses. They said we want to name them A, B, C, D, E. Well, why? Why go through all the work of changing those? Well, we're kind of running out of colors. Oh, okay, far be it from me to second guess everything, but is there more to this? Well, a lot of people who come from foreign countries are colorblind. Well, now, the fact that it says G-O-L-D and it's gold should be able to help them. I hope they can read. But they're colorblind. I said, okay, I give up. 2 years later, we're going to designate the areas in the parking ramps. And what did they do? Colors. I said, so you don't want anybody to get lost on an airplane, but you don't give a damn if they ever find their cars.
Why did they put, is B not connected to A, one of them is not connected?
Yes, they are. They're all connected.
No, it was, for a long time you had to take a bus to,
Well, yeah, but that was while it was under
it's
construction.
connected now.
Yeah, if you stop to think about it, you remember where the post office used to be?
Yeah.
Well, the federal government couldn't decide what they wanted for a post office. And we were under construction, extending the C concourse. And the post office sat right smack in the way. So we built from out by Highway 5, coming inbound toward the terminal, and then built from the terminal out toward Highway 5, and we had to wait till the post office could be removed before we could put that connector in there. And that's what caused all that busing and everything. But, you know, if we'd have waited till the post office was out of the way, those buildings wouldn't be open to this day.
John, could you talk about the moving sidewalks a little bit? Have they worked? I mean, have they not worked? Are they going to expand them? Are they going to get rid of them?
Well, they're sure not gonna get rid of them. And as far as I know, they're working super well. I don't, as I travel around the country, I see fewer of the moving sidewalks in Minneapolis not operating than I do in many other airports.
Are they figuring out why they break? And are they
Well,
planning to add more or not?
We're kind of at the mercy of the companies that provide the service on those. MAC does not employ people but operate those. But I think they work pretty darn well. The big problem we've had was that people mover on the outside of the ABC concourse area. They just about had it up and ready to go, and one of the Otis people was testing it out, and somehow the cars got away from him and he ran them right into the terminal building. And they had to go back to the factory and be reworked, and then they came back and somehow or other somebody ran a crane into it. So then they had to take it back. So it's little circumstances that nobody can control.
Question?
Yes.
Is there any study been done to measure the additional cost to the individual traveler because of the dominance of Northwest Airlines in the Twin Cities? Lack of competition?
Oh, 100. It's studied until it's just about worn out, but, you know, that's one of the things that I found very interesting when I was on the commission. You can get very upset with Northwest and their high fares, but they're an independent company. And that's their business, and we cannot control that. It's too bad, but that's a fact. On the other hand, I think that the people from the upper Midwest, thanks to Northwest being in the area, enjoys better service than people in lots of other parts of the country. So I don't know which is worse, but none of us like to spend more money than we have to. But I don't think we'd want to be around here very long if we couldn't come and go pretty flexibly.
Well, I don't consider the scheduling that they have out of, especially out of Rochester, to be pretty flexible. It seems like anything that you want to connect with in Minneapolis, why, it's a 2.5 to 3 hour wait before you can get an outgoing flight, but with the connection here. So you end up spending half your travel day waiting in the airport.
I can't deny that at all. I travel a lot. This last summer, I was on an evaluation tour for the Air Force and flew 28,000 miles. And between the Homeland Security and waits in airports, I was pretty much exhausted after 6 weeks. But,
John,
excuse me.
tell them where you were. What, you told me what countries you went
Oh,
to, how
well,
many
yeah.
hotels?
Just a second, I'll touch that. But, you know, I can't say enough about the fact that the Metropolitan Airport Commission cannot demand that Northwest do anything. That's restraint of trade, and we just get in all kinds of problems. Now, there is a problem with the connections between Rochester and the Twin Cities. I personally have gone to Northwest Airlines and suggested that they have, in addition to Minneapolis, a flight that would go to Memphis and a flight that would go to Detroit, which would give us a heck of a lot more flexibility. But they don't seem to want to put those on. If you'll remember correctly, when there was Republic Airlines and Northwest Airlines and TWA was operating out of here, what was the name of it? Ozark Airlines was operating out of here, and they got bought out. We had a whole lot better service than we have today. When Northwest and Republic merged, if you'll recall, we almost lost all of our service for a while. And then somebody got to somebody, and it started to improve again.
Can you speak about Masaba? I read where that their pilots only make 17 to 20,000 a year.
I read the same thing. That's the junior pilots. But the more senior people make around 60,000, someplace in that range.
Are they making money?
Sure they are, but they're not gonna if they don't have Northwest Airlines planes to fly. And what I know about that would fill a thimble. I can't, Northwest is one of the bigger shareholders in Masaba. And earlier this year, the two top people at Northwest resigned from the Masaba board. I don't have any idea. I looked at that and I thought, well, that's strange. If I had that investment, I want to be close to it. And the next thing they announced was that they were going to drop the jets that Masaba has been flying. And so that would put Masaba back to a propeller airline. And I don't know why they came up with that, except that they purchased an airline called Pinnacle. And they purchased something like 50 of the Canadian small jets and gave them to Pinnacle Airlines. And Pinnacle is starting to pick up some of the slack.
Who purchased it, Northwest?
Northwest. And they owned it lock, stock, and barrel till about a month ago. And then they took it public.
Well, does that mean that we could get Pinnacle instead of Masaba?
I don't know.
Where does Pinnacle fly?
The major part of its flying is out of Memphis. But they're starting to appear up in our part of the country. And they're flying all jets, the smaller jets, but all jets. So it's pretty good transportation. Yep.
Can you speak to the management of the Rochester Airport? What is the management system and what makes up the body of it? And is there a linkage between the major manufacturers or businesses here in in Rochester and the management of the airport, like IBM or Mayo Clinic or?
Well, I was just gonna get into the Rochester Airport here, and maybe those questions will get answered, and if not, then we'll see what I can do. Well, let's see now, the Rochester Airport, let's go all the way back to 1945. You know that Lob Field, which was down by the Corncob Water Tower, southeast of that, was our airport. In 1945, that airport was owned by the Mayo Clinic. In 1945, the clinic donated Lob Field to the city of Rochester. And
God, who was Lob?
I don't know. I've been told 3 or 4 times and I always forget. I don't know. I also know that there was another airport for the community prior to Lob Field, and it was right out just opposite the indoor tennis club, north of the golf course and east in the open fields down there. But I don't know how long ago that disappeared. The city retained the Rochester Airport Company to run the airport. The Rochester Airport Company, by the way, is the Mayo Foundation. So they still have control of the airport. When the present airport was built, it cost $4.5 million. The federal government, through Federal Aviation Administration, contributed $2,250,000. The state of Minnesota contributed $150,000. $1,500,000, I beg your pardon. And the local share was $750,000. The Mayo Foundation donated $500,000 of that $750,000. So the city of Rochester got a brand new airport for $250,000. I'd say that's a heck of a lot. And it was located so that there weren't going to be a lot of noise problems. This included 1,988 acres of land, all the runways and taxiways, and the lighting. 3 permanent buildings, the terminal, a service building, and the Weather Bureau building. The city also floated a bond issue to build a large municipally owned hangar located at the airport, and that was built so you could have private aviation there, called the FBO. The bond totaled $340,000. It's a general obligation. The bond has long since been paid off. In July 1947, the City Council at a special meeting formed the Airport Commission consisting of 3 members. The members of the commission were specified to be the mayor, the council president, and the city engineer. And that format still exists today. Jerry Braddis was the commission chairman for many, many years. And Lola Helgeson, who was the airport manager back in those days, was part of the group, but he was not a commissioner. This goes back and restates some of this twice, and I want to stay away from that. Under the terms of a management agreement, which was revised in 1975, the company, this is the airport company, retains a management fee as outlined in the enclosure, which they were kind enough not to give to me, so I can't tell you the structure. Now, as I explained before, under the present arrangement, the city of Rochester owns the airport. They own all the buildings on the airport, except for a few privately owned hangars. And as these hangars' useful life comes to an end, the airport itself is building new hangars. So eventually, they will own and completely control all the buildings on the airport. The airport company owns and provides operating equipment, offices, rolling stock for snow removal, snow plows, and all the other good things that go with the airport. Now, why why did the Mail Foundation make that wonderful gift to the city of Rochester? When they owned the airport, and this situation is still in place all over the United States. When an individual or private parties owned an airport, the federal government, through the Federal Aviation Administration, could not contribute any money. You couldn't get any federal or state money, for that matter, if it was privately owned. I happen to be one of the owners of a little airport up at Stanton, Minnesota, where I do my soaring. And we can't get 1 cent of state money to help us support that airport. So we gotta be efficient enough so that we can pay the guy that mows the grass, and all these other things to keep an airport going. Okay, Mayo was in that position, and they wanted to expand the airport. So if they would give it, or if it would end up in the hands of the city of Rochester, then they could apply for federal funding and state funding and so forth. And you've heard how that fell together here. And that's why the Mayo Foundation gave the airport. It's also because of their deep interest in it and the tie between people getting to Rochester and the success of the clinic, why they wanted to continue with the management, and they have to this day. Now, let me see if there's anything in here that would go on. It's going to get too complicated from that, but the Rochester Airport is very similar to the Minneapolis Airport, except for the fact there are no reliever airports here. So you've got a much smaller staff and operation. From my overview and working with Steve Leckway, Chuck Azama appointed a group of people to update the long-range plan. Hello there.
How are you?
You want me to quit?
I'm calling time. No, what I think would be good though, because it is about past 10. And whenever it gets past 10, I know some of you like to get moving, and I want to always be respectful of your time. John thought he probably could talk for 25 to 30 minutes when I asked him to do this, you know? But when he starts talking about airplanes and airports, he probably brings more information and knowledge, not only about here, but the Twin Cities, than most of us would ever even think of encountering.
Sadly, more than you wanted to.
No, it's obvious, they're interested. And I want you to go ahead and keep on talking and asking questions. John wanted to apologize for having to leave. He needed to go to a meeting. And,
The other John.
The other John. And, but he wanted you to be sure and keep going as long as you wanted to keep going. And remind you that we're going to, the January program will be Mike Podolke, and you'll see the ad on that on the stone, more information about the stone. So that will be.
About the what?
What is it? I'm trying to remember.
Stone.
The which one?
The Runestone.
Oh yeah, the Room Stone. He's done a lot of information.
Oh, Kensington Runestone?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's going to be here in January. But we want you to go ahead and keep going. You all right? There's always more coffee. John also wanted you to know to hear about this at the Roger Repertory, the Foreigner Larry Shoe's Classic Comedy.
I'm actually in that show.
All right.
And
Why don't you speak to it?
it's a fundraiser for the Repertory Theater, which has had some of its funding cut, so they're looking for other sources of income. So they just put up a show for one weekend. It'll be Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The show's at 8 o'clock. It's unreserved seating, $15 admission, and at 7:35 there's a band that's going to play, and they'll also play at intermission.
Are you the band?
Thank you. That's
Are you the band that's going to play?
It's a comedy. It's actually quite a.
I'll give you a plug.
Okay.
I saw this, maybe some of the rest of you did too, at the Civic Theater some years ago.
Oh, yeah.
It is
They did.
one of the funniest
It's very funny.
plays I've ever seen.
Well, it's December 11th to 13th.
So it's tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday. Just 3 nights.
Thank you very much for your constancy in coming to the Princess Cafe, and happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
Same to you, Jenny.
We'll see you, well, no, I'll see you next Friday.